Three things I've learned since my total hip replacement. 14 days ago, I had surgery. I underwent a total right hip replacement, and I want to talk to you about three things that I've already learned since my surgery. Number one, an injury or compromise to one area of your body may lead to weakening of other areas of your body as well. Even though my right hip was the problem that led me to have surgery in the first place, and it became the primary reason that I stopped over the past several years doing squats, lunges, and various other exercises to maintain the strength of my legs, the fact is that the destruction of the cartilage of my right hip ultimately led to the loss of muscle tone, loss of strength, and muscle wasting in both my right and left thighs and legs, as well as my gluteus muscles. I started physical therapy the day after my surgery, and it became apparent very quickly that even though I no longer have pain in the hip joint itself, all the muscles surrounding my right hip, as well as the muscles in my opposite leg, are all very weak and they need to be built back up. Point being, our body parts are very interconnected, obviously. So if you've got an injury to your arm, a leg, a knee, to your elbow, shoulder, or your back, as you isolate these areas because of persistent chronic pain, you may find that you've lost some strength in other surrounding muscles when your original injury ultimately heals. So if you're babying a particular area of your body because of surgery or an injury of some kind, if possible, I think it's really important to modify your exercise in ways that maintain your strength in the areas of your body which are outside of the area of your injury. For instance, even though my right hip and leg are compromised because of my surgery, there are still things that I can do to maintain my strength in my upper body. And ignoring my upper body doesn't make much sense as I wait multiple weeks to simply allow my hip to heal. We have an island in our kitchen, and being able to do modified standing push-up using the edge of the island enables me to, at least to some degree, to be able to keep my upper body, and in particular the muscles of my chest and my tricep muscles, from wasting during the time that I allow my hip to heal. My physical therapist already has me doing these squats using the kitchen sink to hold on to. In fact, I haven't been able to do any form of squats or lunges for several years now because of the pain in my right hip. So as I'm doing these exercises with the goal of strengthening the muscles around my right hip and thigh, the area involving my total hip replacement, what I notice as much as anything is that my left thigh and gluteus muscles are just as sore as those on my right after doing these exercises for my new right hip. But this is a good thing because I haven't been able to do anything close to what I'm doing here with these kitchen sink squats for many, many years. And it gives me hope that I'll be able to rebuild my gluteus muscles and the muscles in both my lower extremities over time, which should improve my odds of living longer and stronger, while also being able to maintain my fitness as I grow chronologically older. I'm very grateful to be living at a time in history where joint replacements like these are not only possible, but they've attained a level of reliability and durability such as to allow people to return to a level of functionality, in many cases rivaling where they may have been many, many years prior to the injury or disability that led them to have surgery in the first place. Number two, my blood glucose trends over the past 2 weeks since surgery. Now, I've been able to visualize my blood glucose being persistently elevated even over periods of time where I haven't eaten much of anything since having surgery. And as a matter of fact, because it's a usual part of pre-surgical protocol to fast after midnight and before surgery, I hadn't eaten anything since around 10 p.m. the night prior to my hip replacement. I was in the OR by about 7 a.m. and my surgery was complete by mid-morning on July 24th. I was back home by 2 p.m. that afternoon, but I didn't have much of an appetite for the next several days, and so I had very little food in my system from around 10 p.m. the night prior to surgery and over the course of the following 72 hours. Regardless, because I've been wearing a continuous glucose monitor for the past couple of months to learn what my blood glucose has been doing and how various foods and exercise affect it, I've been able to visualize some trends that intellectually I anticipated would be happening, but without the continuous glucose monitor, I would have never been able to actually see or verify in real time that it was actually occurring. So here's what I've seen. Looking back over my time in the operating room, which only took a couple of hours hours, my blood glucose was very stable and consistently under 120 without any noticeable spikes during the operation. I think the most likely explanation for this is the fact that in addition to the spinal anesthesia that they used to numb me from my waist down to my toes, they also used an IV drug called propofol. Now, propofol is a drug used for procedural sedation, but it can also induce general anesthesia, which is a state in which people have complete loss of awareness and consciousness, along with the lack of awareness of pain. Thank goodness. Under a state of general anesthesia, regardless of the fact that my surgeon was sawing off the head of my right femoral bone and doing a number of other traumatic interventions to give me a brand new hip, because of propofol, my brain had no awareness, even on a subconscious level, as to what was taking place. Again, I'm very grateful that this is the case. But in terms of my blood glucose trend over the course of time in the operating room, the fact that I maintained a relatively normal blood glucose trend and without any significant spikes verified to me with good general anesthesia the brain isn't interpreting pain, stress, or fear under the circumstances. On the other hand, over the course of the 72 hours following surgery, I noticed that my blood glucose began to rise well above 130, and it stayed there persistently for long periods of time. Now, in case you might be wondering, I'm not a type 2 diabetic, and if you watched this video here and you know I had a doctor label me pre-diabetic last summer, to the contrary, my pre-op A1C drawn just a week prior to my hip surgery was only 5.2, which is completely normal and not anywhere near pre or type 2 diabetic range. And I tell you this not to brag about my normal A1C, but to highlight the fact that despite the significance that's often given to a single elevated blood glucose reading, such as in the ER or in the setting of a doctor's office, whatever that reading happens to be may need to be interpreted in light of other things going on in a patient's life, which could be affecting their blood glucose level without them being pre or type 2 diabetic. So to that point, I've spent the past year believing I must be pre-diabetic or have suboptimal glucose control because a single fasting blood glucose reading came back at 113 1 year ago, and a doctor labeled me as being pre-diabetic. So here's what's become clear to me over the past 2 weeks since having my total hip replacement. My continuous glucose monitor has clearly validated the impact that pain and stress play in what goes on minute by minute with our blood glucose levels during and after a surgical procedure. While unconscious, during surgery, my blood glucose levels were essentially normal and very stable. Once awake and my brain becoming aware that something traumatic had taken place in the region of my right hip, along with an increase of pain signals coming from that area, my blood glucose levels began to rise and they stayed elevated for several days. This validated something else to me as well. If you've seen this video here where I talk about the body offloading stored sugar calories, then you know that normal physiology allows for the release of stored glucose at times when our bodies are stressed or operating with little or no food or fuel. Remember, I barely ate anything for the first 72 hours after surgery, and yet my blood glucose was captured at 171. That glucose was present in the bloodstream, but it wasn't coming from any food I'd recently ingested. That was a visual validation of the body offloading stored blood glucose to meet my body's energy needs post-surgery, despite the presence of limited or no fuel in real time. Number 3, post-surgical opioid-induced constipation is real. Post-surgical opioid-induced constipation is very real, and it can be very painful. Now, this may seem less profound, but it's an important topic that I don't want to ignore or minimize, especially if you may be facing a surgical procedure yourself in the near future. It's not uncommon, especially following surgery, and in particular orthopedic surgery of various kinds, to receive a prescription for narcotic or opioid pain medication. But as great as opioids can be in terms of reducing our perception of pain, they also slow the movement of food content through the GI tract, allowing more time for the body to absorb water from the colon, resulting in hard, dry stool that can be very difficult to pass. Looking back over the past 2 weeks, I really didn't eat much over the first week following surgery, and honestly didn't drink as much water as I probably should have. For one thing, it was very painful getting up out of bed for the first several days, and every trip to the bathroom to urinate was very uncomfortable for my right hip and thigh, even as I was bearing most of my weight on a walker to and from the bathroom. But by the end of the first post-op week, I was getting around a lot better and with a lot less pain on weight bearing. I was transitioning from a walker to walking with a cane. My appetite was improving and I began to tolerate food without experiencing nausea. And with the ingestion of food, inevitably there comes the need for the body to move out content that's already occupying the colon at the time. I won't go into detail about the events of July 30th, 6 days after my surgery, but I will show you my continuous glucose monitor from that morning, and you can draw your own conclusions about how uncomfortable I was on the morning of July 30th. Case in point, if you have surgery and your doctor encourages you to stay well hydrated and also happens to prescribe a laxative along with your pain medication, do yourself a favor, do what your doctor encourages you to do. Keep yourself well hydrated, fill your prescriptions, and take them as your doctor prescribed them. I promise you'll thank me later. Hope you're all doing well. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.